Okay. Mr. Commissioner, how are you? Thank you very much. Here, have a seat. Okay. Go ahead. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Richard Hudson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Science Business, and I'd like to welcome you, our members and our guests, here to this conference, both in this room here in Brussels and watching online. What we are about to talk about is quite important. Brussels is a peculiar place in many ways, but one of the ways it's peculiar is that it has this rhythm, this cycle of everybody, suddenly politics slows down in the summer, and then come la rentrée, and boom, everything starts again. So we are here with you to try to restart what is, for our world, the most important discussion of all, and that is, what are the priorities for spending and policy, both across the EU, but specifically focusing on research and innovation. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I would like to first off, though, however, thank our members. Our network has grown. We are nearly 60 members now, and I'd like to thank those of the members who are here, and I'd also like to thank as well AstraZeneca and Pfizer for being able to support us in this particular event as well. A bit of news to begin. Florian, could we have the screen? We have launched a new website about 2 o'clock this morning. So take a look at it. I mean, you know, the last one was 7 years ago, so technology changes. Why not another one? Take a look at it. Any comments that you have on how we can make it better would be very much appreciated. Secondly, Marilyn Fiaschi, my colleague, will elaborate on this later, but we are also starting another focus group of our network, specifically this time on innovation markets. As many of you know, we have the overall network, and then we have subgroups in different sectors. There's one group on the science cloud, another group on health, there's another group on the framework program, and this will be the 4th group on markets, fundamentally. So if you're interested as members in joining that, we'll talk. And now to the point. This report, which many of you have seen, with the catchy title, Lab FAP App, was released July 3rd. This was the report of the high-level group that was led by Pascal Lamy, former commissioner and head of the World Trade Organization, with many very interesting suggestions about the future of EU research and innovation funding. To discuss those with us, I'm delighted to welcome Commissioner, Commissioner Carlos Moedas, who is the EU Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation. Please, Commissioner. So thank you very much for joining us, Commissioner. So this is a very interesting report, lots of recommendations. So help us figure out what's most important in it, in your opinion.
There's 2 things. So first of all, good afternoon to everybody. I was supposed to do something,
oh, yeah.
But I'll do it.
Good, now it's on.
Good, now it's on. Thank you very much. First of all, it's really good to see you here and to see the family, because I think that I'm talking to people that are really passionate about the the subject.
Oh, that's
so
for sure.
It's fantastic to be here, Richard, and thank you for organizing that. There's two things that I would like to highlight about Pascal Lamy. I think that probably in 2.5 years was one of the best things we decided was to invite Pascal Lamy. And there was two reasons for that, because he's really, I think, one of the visionaries of Europe and about the European identity and about how to link people to the European project. But at the same time, because I think that Pascal Lamy puts the discussion not just at the level that we are here, that we are all passionate about it, but he puts at the level of the heads of state, heads of government, who are the real decision makers for the future of the budget. And I think that that's something that was very unique. Before, we would try to do these kind of reports with people that are from our family. And so there were reports from us to us. And the Lamy report is really different. But then I think that if you look at the report, and there's all these recommendations, I kind of see some horizontal messages from the Lamy report. I think there's, for me, one very clear message from Lamy, and it was always there, was that it's just not, I mean, it's not about just the money, it's about the framework conditions, it's about changing in terms of regulation, it's in terms of creating the conditions in every country. And I think that even if something that we keep repeating, is important, Richard, to repeat it and to feel it. Mm-hmm. That the countries feel that innovation in science is not just about the funding, it's about much more than that. The second message that I think is really very important in the report is the fact that we should more look at the individual than the innovation, more the individual than the science, meaning by that the scientist and the innovator. And I think that goes along the way of what we've been building in terms of the ERC, but also this idea of the European Innovation Council, the idea of going bottom-up in terms of innovation.
So does that mean we'll have no more mega consortia?
No, I think that's also, you know, it's very interesting because when you take one idea, when I came to this job, I thought there's so many things that we do well, let's keep it, and let's see what we don't do well. And anytime I try to talk about the things like I think we're not doing that well, and Lamy calls it an innovation deficit, I think that I'm trying to fix that. But to fix that, I'm not going to destroy what is well done. And I think there's two things that we do really well. One is everything we do in terms of fundamental research in the ERC and collaboration. 75% of our projects are collaborations, are basically consortia of universities, of companies, and we do that very well. And so I think what we're talking about for the next frame program is not about destroying what's well done and the great things that we have, but it's about doing something else. And Lamy, he kind of grasps that very well in what I found was very funny because it's very French and at the same time was interesting in the title, which is this word fab, that for probably more an Anglo-Saxon will be about fabulous, but for a French person it will be more about fabrication. And I think that that's the part or the triangle that we have to work. And the third message, because I think those messages that I was talking about, they are cross-cutting and they are horizontal to the report, is this idea of connecting to the people through mission-driven science, mission-driven innovation. And I think that's the key for the Union and for the project of the European Union, because we lost that link with the people. And the idea that science can be the tool to create that link that we lost, I think that's something very unique. And it's something that we really need for the future. And I think that I see the Lamy report not as a number of vertical recommendations, but more an horizontal message that is very political in the days that we're living today.
Okay, we'll come back to the mission issue because actually we have a few of our members who are going to give a few suggestions of possible missions. There are in the Lamy report already several concrete suggestions. But to come back to that individual point that you make, so 75% collaboration in FP9, should it be less?
No, I don't have a number for you. I think that collaboration is essential for science, is essential for innovation. But when I say that I want to go also bottom-up on innovation, it doesn't mean that it cannot be collaborative, because innovation is about collaborating. Even bottom-up is a collaboration. If I come to you with an idea, what I'm telling is that I don't want that idea to be already in a box. But that idea, by definition, if I come with a new battery of the future, it has to be collaborative, because probably the guy will invent the new battery doesn't actually know anything about batteries.
But if I'm the battery maker, am I going to have to get 3 partners in to do it with me?
I think
formally?
I always, I'm a good listener, and I always got the message very clear from our scientists and from our people, is that to impose a number of people that have to collaborate, like people would tell me, no, today to have a Horizon 2020 project, I have to have 10 or 11 people. Okay. If not, I can't have it. I mean, I just think that doesn't make any sense. It's not about the number of people. It's about how good are that people, if that collaboration makes sense. So I think that we should, it's not a question of being strict about the number of people that will collaborate. It's not about saying that everything will be bottom-up. But when you look at today the fragmentation that we have in our innovation arena, we have to get something that is much less fragmented and is more bottom-up. We're talking about 2.6 billion in this first part, and I know that the Director General was here not long ago and told you about it, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So we're not talking about going bottom-up all over the program. So I want to be clear that this is not about doing less about fundamental research. The contrary. I've proven in these...
it's not?
It's not.
Well, because I have to say, Commissioner, there's a lot of universities who are kind of panicking, saying that...
They should not, because I think that they should look more at the way I've been acting. When we had the opportunity to actually propose to the Parliament more money in 2017, a big part of that money went actually to the ERC, and we always count on that, and I think that's essential. And I think it's a little bit sometimes, but that's political life, and I'm a political agent in that sense, that because I'm trying to fix one part, people say that I'm not doing the job in the other side, and that's not true. And I'm really one of the biggest fans of what we do in terms of the European Research Council, and everybody knows how I cherish, and I want it to be bigger, of course, but that's a decision that the countries will have to make. I mean, if I had more money, I would put more money. But I don't have that money. Look, I mean, I think that people that are here from the different countries, what is the Council proposing for 2018? A cut? A cut. In Horizon 2020.
The deepest cut in the whole
Who's
thing?
Proposing that? Is the Council, is the people, the governments of your countries. So, you know, you also have to be vocal about it.
Commissioner, do you oppose that? Do you think that's wrong?
I think it's wrong. I think that it's wrong. I mean, how can you, in a Europe that wants to be at the top of the development, at the top of being the best of the best in class, to cut in science and innovation?
Is there any hope of changing that?
No, I hope there is. I hope that people probably after the conference will call their governments and be a little bit vocal about it.
But I think it's a 450 million cut.
No, I don't know what will be, and it will be very impolite for me to discuss that here. But I will fight against it, that's for sure. I mean, I will fight against it. I'm fighting against it, and I'm going around every minister of science. But last time, for instance, I went to Estonia, I wanted to see also the Minister of Finance. So I'm trying to meet with the Ministers of Finance to basically tell them, look, when you look at the world is going in the direction today that people are basically saying in some parts of the world, unfortunately, that they don't believe in science, they don't believe in experts. They kind of like going the other way. What an amazing opportunity we have in Europe, if we keep going the way we know it's right. So I think that if the Prime Ministers and the Minister of Finance decide that we want to be leaders, and we can really be the leaders today, because the other parts of the world don't want to be those leaders, I think that's a very definite choice, and that's what the budget the future budget of the European Union should be. A budget where people make hard choices. And a hard choice is to say we'll put more in research.
The other parts of the world, is that a reference to the Trump administration? Then?
No, not in particular. I think it's not just in the US. You see it also in other parts of the world. I see that where I go, and even in countries in different places, even in Europe, that are not paying the utmost attention to science and innovation. I don't see that many prime ministers putting in their speeches and talking about it. I don't see the heads of state and government, and so I'm really telling people, please grasp the opportunity. And I think it's not a question of the Trump administration. Of course, I think that the United States is and will always be a fantastic ally that we have, and we want to work more with them. But if you look at the statements of President Trump in terms of climate change, in terms of looking at the environment, I think that he's not going in the direction that we are going in Europe. And I think that, you know, for us, it's an opportunity.
It's an
and
opportunity.
I want to grasp that. I want to grasp that. I want to grasp this idea that I think President Macron was probably the first to put it really orally, of getting the best people around the world to come to Europe. And you know what? People want to come to Europe. People are telling me and asking me and calling me more about what's the ERC grant. And I get calls from all over the world, so that's good. It's because Europe is doing the right thing. So we have to really put around the table the prime ministers and the heads of state and government to decide for the next budget that research, science, and innovation is a priority for Europe.
But
so
the politics of this is interesting. I mean, Chancellor Merkel, it is said, has used the threat, as it were, the fear of the Trump administration to help pull Europe together. That it is a reason why Europe should come together. Is this, in the research and innovation world, can this be also a political motivation for spending more on research and innovation? Is that, because part of my question is basically, how do you muster the political support for what you're talking about?
I think connecting with the people, and that's where the idea that we'll talk later about the missions is important. Because, you know, countries can go in different ways. Countries can say that they want their people to work more hours so they get more productive. Countries can say that they can actually put people working the same number of hours but paying them less, and they get more productive in terms of labor. But I think that's not the choice of Europe. The choice of Europe is to go up on the value chain, is to do better than others. And, you know, when I look at a country like Germany that exports as much as China, I mean, it's because they do the best of the best. And I think that the model that we want to be able to have welfare and a social system that works for all, that actually attracts people from all over the world, it's just because we are better at doing our products, and we have to be better together. And that's the problem, is that the average doesn't mean anything, because some countries in Europe are very good and some countries are not. And I think that that's the work that we have to put together. So yes, today research, science, innovation is, to your question straight, is more political than ever, because I think the world that before would look at just science and innovation as a very technical thing, today is a political statement. Because it's a political statement that says, if I have more science and innovation, I can maintain my social welfare, I can maintain a social Europe. And that's the only way I have. So it's political. Okay. It's political. And I think this link in between creating value, innovation, science, and the social welfare and the social Europe probably was not there before. People would separate, like, oh, it's very good to have science and innovation. I mean, to these products, but no, it's not a nice to have. It's a need for our social model, and that's what we want. I mean, that's what people are looking for all over the world.
All right. Last question before we bring the others up, and that is simply the Lamy report calls for a doubling of the budget. And then it waffles a little bit and says, well, maybe 120. But so what are you calling for?
My job is not to call for a number, because I think that in my position that will actually put me in a corner. My job is twofold: to tell people, look, you're talking about the United States. The United States invests more 150 billion and odd so than us every year. You want to achieve 3% of research, science, innovation in GDP. Oh, coincidence, the number is the same. You need more 150 billion. So I think that my job is to tell people that we need more money if we want to keep Europe as the Europe that we love. And without that, it will be very difficult. And so we know that it will be very difficult to convince countries around Europe to have a bigger budget. That's a reality.
Right.
I mean, if you look at around Europe, it's difficult. So that's not my ball game. That's not on my payroll. On my job is to tell countries, look, the choices we will make, whatever the money is, whatever the cake is that I don't know, you have to actually allocate more to science and innovation. Having just 8% of the total budget for science and innovation seems to me that is not logical. It's not logical in the way we want to be. It's not logical for the European politicians. And so I think that my job is to say, the Parliament is asking for 120 billion. An independent report, Lamy, is also asking for that doubling. And they are doing so with a reason. And that reason is that if we want to be more productive, if we want to get a better life, we have to do it. And so I'll put myself in a position of not showing all the cards, but you can be sure that I believe deeply that we need more. And it's not a question of more, it's a question that when you look at the amount that we manage in a European level, I had not long ago on the phone Francis Collins from the NHS. I mean, the NHS annual budget is
NIH.
NIH,
yeah,
sorry,
right.
NIH, NHS.
Yeah, right.
not the same, I'm sorry.
Not at all.
So from the NHS, NIH, he was telling 30 billion a year. So 30 billion a year is a big amount of money just for health. And so in terms of Europe, just saying that you get 10 billion a year is not enough. It's not enough at all. So we will basically ask for more, that's for sure. But I'll hope that I'll get here to better with good news and the number, but I would not like to put that number now on the table.
Let's bring the others up, if I may, to debate this a little bit of the priorities here, okay? So may I ask the other panelists to join me? Karin? Yeah? Marco? Yeah. So I'm joined by, please, Karen Max, who is the Rector Magnificus, always a grand title in the Netherlands, of the University of Amsterdam. Beside her is Walter Weigel, who is Vice President for the Huawei European Research Institute and of research in Europe, fundamentally. To my left is Marco Marcola, who is First Vice President of the Committee of the Regions and was, until, a month ago, President of the Committee of the Regions. So, welcome. Now, this question is of priorities, okay? So, you said 8% is research and innovation. What is it? Agriculture is like 40%, something like that?
If you put together the structural funds plus agriculture, it's 72%.
72%.
So agriculture plus structural funds, more than 70%, so 72
right.
or 73. And innovation and science is 8%. So that's what you're talking about.
But why is it realistic to think that that's ever going to change? I mean, this has been a battle that's been fought for, as long as I've been in Brussels.
You know, I think that there's a change in generation in the political arena of Europe. There's a change that we're living in terms of presidents like Macron that want really to make a difference. And I think that before, the discussion was not at a political level in terms of research, science, and innovation, and today it is. when you see the president of China, Xi Jinping, talking about and saying, oh, we've tried austerity, we've tried monetary policy, should we try innovation? When you have the Chinese president saying these, then it becomes political. And 10 years ago was not like that. So I think we are at a tipping point of being able to do something.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to be now or in 5 years or 10 years, but I feel that we are at the right time in terms of having a political decision that is better. But Marco knows.
I mean, but more money for him is less money for you.
No, exactly.
Okay, no, it's a real, you know.
Let me clarify a bit so that take agriculture. Yeah. It needs much more innovation than it has today. The second largest business area in Europe is agri-food. So, and it needs much more innovation. So inside that, what we are putting to agriculture, we need to get people there to do more for innovation. And another good example is that what do we do with the EU R&D funding? So we need to remember that only very, very small part of research and innovation funding in Europe is through the EU budget. So if our money or Carlos Moeda's targeted money is used more creating synergy, more creating catalyzing effect, so the industrial investments in R&D or national funding, university fundings are creating much more impact. And so that is what we are looking for, so that inside each different activity area, much more will be targeted to innovation. Or cohesion policy, what is our strong interest, so that we want to develop the regions all around in Europe, close the innovation divide. But on that cohesion funding, much more than in the past, will be targeted towards innovation, and that needs then the scientific evidence-based research.
But can this work? Because I mean, with the, you know, in cohesion funding, the smart specialization strategy has been running for since I think what, 5 years? I'm a little vague on that.
Yes.
Yeah. The reports of it so far, I mean, there was a parliamentary report that was not very flattering about the outcomes so far. So how, one has to ask, can this work, really?
Actually, it has to work. So, because we clearly see with the Brexit process that we need to be much more targeted for renewal, kind of new kind of mindset, even in our own Committee of the Region policy, representing all the cities and regions in Europe. We have the priority number one, it's this economic development, but it's not whatever growth. It needs to be sustainable growth, and then on that we put three major, let's say, aspects, elements for change. Entrepreneurial mindset, functioning or even fully functioning digital single market, and then the smart specialization, so that we do more together, more through the partnerships. And certain regions, certain cities put more on this priority, on that, and then they build these priorities. And now, thanks to the Commission, in 18th of July, they made a very important political decision about the future of the smart specialization. So that will be more and more the guiding principle on guiding, targeting the innovation money, and as well for creating the new financial framework after 2020.
Can I just corroborate?
Yes.
Because I think that what Marco is saying, I think that we're given some steps that are in the right direction. And when we, at the beginning, when I came and I said to my people, let's do something with the structural funds, most of the people had the reaction you just had. I mean, people have been trying.
Cynical Brussels
and
people.
Cynical Brussels.
Yeah, right,
cynical Brussels, but I was new, so I kind of believed it. And when we had this idea with Corina Kretek to create the Seal of Excellence, we knew that it was not perfect, but it kind of worked, was the first step. And so what I'm working now with Corina Kretek and talked a lot with Marco, if we can do it for the next phase, something bigger, because now people get a Seal of Excellence when they can't get money from Horizon 2020, then they could go to the structural funds, but they have to go through the process. So we have to improve that. That is a huge step. I mean, it's a very obvious, simple thing to do, but it was done. And that made also that I started working a lot with my colleague Phil Hogan, and I think we will be able, I cannot announce it here because we've been working quite hard in terms of doing exactly what Marco was saying, that agriculture today is about how do you digitalize, how you create this research and science in agriculture. So I think that we can create situations, and we can actually do more for agriculture if we invest more in innovation and science in agriculture and have a multiplier effect of that, knowing that most, for instance, of agriculture is not yet digitalized. If you do that, it's innovation, it's science, and it's agriculture. And so I think that we have to see it as ways of creating bridges in between the worlds that are actually of benefit for everybody. And that when I go and I visit people, farmers, they want that. The young farmers today in my country, and I see a lot of them because I come from a region of farmers, what they tell me is, how can you help me on this new world of innovation in digital, and I want to be able to digitalize everything I do in my farm, and that will get me to be more productive, to produce more. And so I think there's also a point where if you look at the economy today, the step is about innovation in digital in these areas. And so if people are open, then we can actually kind of have the budgets of each other's somehow to work together. I just wanted to corroborate.
Let me just link to that, so what you said, the young farmers. So it's very much with the young persons, young generation is doing in different sectors. They are very strongly, let's say, university-based people or studying at the university, moving to startups and going to renew different, let's say, business sectors, bringing their fresh ideas, because they are, the young generation is so kind of digitalized, globally networked people who bring the latest knowledge. And that is making the big change to happen. That's what we see, and we are using cohesion funding to encourage that very much.
Karen, could I come to you? I mean, so these priorities, agriculture, regions, research, I mean, they're kind of proposing, if I may say, gentlemen, kind of like a bit of a shmush, you know, that they kind of, they're all the same. Does that work?
Well, I have a slightly different view of that. Of course, I come from a different point of view. But what I do agree also with what you said is, I mean, you have to. There's two things you have to invest in. One is a research and innovation environment which it really works like a dynamic, open, networked process. Okay, not too many walls, an open process. This is one thing. And the other thing, and that can be in agricultural teams, I mean, that can be, or that will be for the future, very important also for your field. But I don't see this as something separate. It should be really like an interfaced, a good working system. And that starts, or that contains very fundamental applied research that also needs innovation type research, development, and so forth. And it will also, in your sector, come to a benefit. And the other thing we have to invest in is in people. People, like also the programs do ERC
So do you agree with that, Lamy's suggestion, emphasis on individuals?
I think it's both. It is the network, the open network, where people find each other and really do the right thing, because there is a lot of people who are innovative, but the environment does not allow them too much to do. So I think we have to just foster that. Universities play an important role in that. There's a lot in education, and also education in entrepreneurship, and also the environment of university and the collaborative work with other sectors to make sure that this knowledge, it doesn't flow from the one to the other, it interacts. And it is this interaction also we have to foster. And so I can only applaud the request or the idea to have more money in the framework of research and innovation, fundamental and applied research in that sense, because I think it will solve some of the problems or some of the concerns that you have anyhow in that way, in a better way.
Okay. Walter, does Europe spend enough on research and innovation?
No, certainly not. So I'm representing today, I think, the industry view. And I wanted to point out a few things. I'm working for a global player headquartered in China. I worked a very long time for Siemens, global player headquartered in Europe, in Germany. Last time you invited Alessandro, IBM, headquartered in the US. I think we have to be aware, why do we global companies do research here? Because we think these are the best researchers in the world for certain topics. And I'm coming from information and communication technology. Can also be true for biogenetics or chemics. So we are in a global competition, because if I think the better researchers and the better ecosystem for research is in India or in the US, we will go there. Now, saying this, as Commissioner Moedas said, I think since many, many years there is a misbalance between the currently 70 billion and on the agricultural and the structural funds, which gives the impression that our GDP and creating jobs is here in Europe priority one on construction and farming. I think that's not true, because we are high-tech countries, actually with high salaries and the high costs. So we have to be leading in high-tech in general. Now, one thing is clear. I would like to have much more funding. We also know that the success rate of Horizon 2020 is about 14%, which means 7 out of 8 proposals, where a lot of scientists have used maybe 3-4 months to prepare this proposal. We, so to say, throw it away. So I think, yes, we have to do more. And I wanted also to mention another report. I'm not sure whether this is publicly available. The German Academy for Sciences, ACATEC, under the leadership of the former Max Planck president, Professor Stratmann, has done for the German government an analysis about the impact of DARPA in the US. And as you may know, what they are doing is, and you can see it in autonomous vehicles, why is now Google or Tesla and these companies quite advanced? We always thought we here in Europe, with Fiat, Renault, Peugeot, BMW, and you name them, we may be leading. What happened is, from a very different reason, namely logistics in military, they ask for one of these grand challenges. And what they do is, they give 2 million to the winners, a very simple scheme how you can apply. And this is where they go forward and throw the stone, so to say, forward. And this ACATEC report recommends to the German government in this case, but I think we can transfer it on European level, that we do something like this as well. And even they recommend to the German government to create an agency for radical innovation. So going in the direction Commissioner Moedas.
Defense related or not specifically?
No, in general.
Okay.
And okay, last topic here. I'm personally very much looking into, and we are also doing bilateral projects, so with our own budget. I think we in Europe are currently really world leading in quantum research. And there are first little products out, but I cannot see how we in Europe bring the horsepower into the market and that we really take advantage of this. By the way, are you aware that the biggest quantum computer in the world is currently in Austria, not in the US or in China? Also, they do a lot of publicity on it. A second one is, as we all go into digitization, you have to store the data somewhere if you want to use it, big data or cloud. And one big debate is what will come after the famous memory chips called DRAM. And again, we are here in Europe, in Spain, in UK, in Germany, we are leading currently alternatives. What will come next? And I do not really see that we are taking these results from the researchers and then creating enough startups and taking this into the business, so to say. Even this is a little bit further away. So I would suggest that we work out a strategy. Where are we leading? And if it is then innovation in farming, fine. But we have to have a strategy. We want to lead here. We are already leading here. And so not to distribute the money with the lawnmower, but really to make impact and then to bet on it that jobs and GDP are created.
But Walter, making impact requires that there be some hard political choices about where to spend the money. And so as you began your comments by saying one would get the impression that the most important thing in Europe is farming and construction. So I guess I'm kind of looking for a political solution to that. That's your job also.
Yeah, but I think that, I mean, is definitely, I think, when you look at Europe today, and you look at the political will, I think the political will is going in that direction.
Right. Okay.
And I go around all the countries in Europe, and I think that I don't know anyone in any country in Europe that doesn't really is aligned in terms of saying we need more in terms of science and innovation. But then you have the other political level, which is the heads of state and the heads of government and finance ministers. And there's where we have to put the conversation. And that's why I think the Lamy report is very useful, to put the conversation at that level. But you were just saying about the quantum technology. And I mean, it's very not worrying, but it makes me think. Then just last 2 months ago in China, for the first time, they were able to prove that the notion of entanglement that Einstein created actually worked with 2 particles apart from like 1 kilometer or so. Or
really
whatever.
Exciting news.
Exciting news. Yeah. But that is a wake-up call for us. It's a wake-up call. We have to run. So it's good for the Chinese. I'm very happy for the Chinese, but it's really for us very, very important. I mean, and then you think, well, where is the guy that knows more about it in the world? I mean, and actually he's a French Nobel Prize that we know very well, you know, and you know, it's the knowledge is here. But then we have to get that step of the disruptive innovation of how to create, and we have to have the impact. And on that, I just wanted to say a little bit something that people don't realize. 2-3 years ago, we had around 5 billion raised in venture capital in Europe. We went ahead with this idea of creating a fund of funds for Europe that is ongoing. If we are able to do it, we can actually double those 5 billion. That was the whole European investment, because we're putting, as you know, around 1.6 billion of investment in funds that basically will probably invest in other funds, and that will have an impact of doubling it. That's what we need more in Europe, and that's what we are doing. But then people don't know about it. And so I think it's also ourselves to pass on the message, and that's why when you're talking about impact, we're really creating a way of doubling the venture capital in Europe, and it's something that will have results on that impact. And so I hope we can really be at least a little bit ahead of the curve.
Okay, so at this point, Commissioner, as you probably know, have seen, there's a bit of a news flash today. A bit of news that comes in and affects this discussion very much, actually. And that was that about a little over 2 hours ago, the UK government finally put out a paper on what it wants to see for science and innovation. We are very fortunate to have with us Professor Michael Arthur, the Provost of University College London, who is also head of the Brexit Committee for LERU, the League of European Research Universities. And so we would, you know, let's, Commissioner, I realize this is a very delicate topic for you, but you've seen the paper.
For me, yes, but not for the professor. He's free to talk.
Yeah, but if I, just for those of you who have not seen it yet, well, first off, no surprise, it's kind of vague, very vague, actually, like all of the British papers. It does call for a, quote, far-reaching science and innovation agreement with the EU. Good. Basically, it says we want to keep doing everything we've been doing. But the most interesting line in the whole paper was just one sentence, I thought. It said they want to explore forging a more ambitious and close partnership with the EU than any yet agreed between the EU and a non-EU country. Translation, that means they want to be closer than Norway and Switzerland.
And Israel.
Israel, yes, right, Israel. Okay, yes. Michael, what does that mean? Translate, please.
Well, the first thing I want to say is I certainly don't represent the British government.
No, I know you don't.
And I'm not a negotiator, so please don't regard me like that. And just a slight correction, I lead the Europe group for the Russell Group.
Oh, sorry, oops.
The Russell Group at University
Kurt de Kettler would kill me, okay.
Please note that we call it the Europe Group, we don't call it the Brexit Group. I think what I would say about this is to come straight to the heart of this, which is in essence what the Commissioner has been talking about. If you want European science to be globally competitive, it would be our view, the leading universities of the UK, and it would seem that that now coincides with the government's view, that it would be much better to make a future arrangement that includes us rather than excludes us. And it's absolutely what we want. Left to my own devices, by the way, I just have straight full membership of the EU. But if that isn't...
Are you allowed to say that?
I'm allowed to say whatever I want as an individual. And it's what I feel, and it's what many academics in the UK feel. But there is the realpolitik, and the realpolitik is advancing, albeit fairly slowly through the discussions. But it's our view that the future of British science and the future of European science, if it's going to be competitive with the Chinese and with the Americans and with many other nations whose science is being invested in and is rising, that we have to work together. And so we're looking for an arrangement that allows us to do that. And when I've been talking, as I have been in the last 24 hours, to various groups here in Brussels, I've been using the phrase, associated country plus. And what is the plus? Well, to be discussed, but it's about interacting with the system in a very positive and meaningful way to influence its future for the better for both of us, for Europe and for the UK.
But the paper...
So it's about a seat at the table and a discussion. It isn't necessarily about having that final vote, but I guess the detail will be in the way in which this actually shapes up and precisely what our government means when it says a better relationship than any other non-EU country.
But the paper appears to yield no ground on the issue of free movement of people. Which is, how do you have association plus without something plus on free movement of people? This is something, of course, that's quite vital to the universities.
Yeah. Well, and here in
I think, by the way, did I correctly hear you quoted as saying that, what was it, 75% of your EU staff have been approached? It must have been misquoted.
It wasn't misquoted. It is anecdotal, right? I have not surveyed all my European staff and asked them whether or not they've had a phone call. I have noticed a very large number of vice-chancellors visiting UCL, and it's been like a low swoop of people trying to pick up our best staff and cart them off to Canada and Australia and America and other parts of Europe. So somewhat inevitably, when there's restlessness, by the way, I'd be doing the same, I don't blame you. I did say to all those vice-chancellors, first of all, I know you've been, and secondly, I know where you live. So somewhat inevitably, the phones are ringing for some of our best staff to move back to Europe, and one or two so far have. I have also recruited the other way, so I don't think we're in a crisis situation yet, but definitely the impact of all of this is happening. And I did quote one thing which is more factual, which is a series of excellence fellowships that we advertise each year. We have about 5 or 6 or 7 of these each year. They're career starter awards. They get people ready for major fellowships from ERC or elsewhere. We have a lot of applications, well over 100 each year, and usually about 30% are from other European institutions. This year, nobody from another European institution applied. So the impact of all of this is already beginning to happen in British science, and of course we're worried about it. And if I look at my very best teams at UCL, Europeans are overrepresented, and most of them came to UCL when they were PhD students or postdocs. So I'm very worried about that pipeline of talent through into the British science system. But that's a sort of slightly more selfish
Karen, what
UK
about
view.
what about the Brits at Amsterdam?
In Amsterdam?
The Brits at the University of Amsterdam.
Well,
or Volta. What about British
the British are in our system, in all our projects, so there's a lot of collaboration. They just are part of our scientific and innovation community. So we would like to keep it that way.
Yeah.
For sure.
Is there any question about whether they will be able to continue?
Well, we have to see how things fall down in the end, and then we will see what we can do to make it work again. That's for sure.
Let me just add, since we, the Committee of the Region, we represent all the cities and regions in Europe, so we have a strong participation from UK as well. And our key policy has been now during the Brexit process as well, so that we want to develop this collaboration one way or the other, so that our regions and cities do collaborate. But then what it means, so we want to take care of our 27 member states and our interests. So it will be in the future much stronger innovation hubs in the 27 EU. And so we invite the talents from UK, your universities, to bring your best experts to work with us, flying over, of course, but then keep your access code to your bank account so that they can bring the money as well. So I'm happy that the UK government is saying that they are putting more attention. That means as well more money on that. So, but the future hotspots of that globally as well be more on the EU. Sorry to say, but you need to be here as well, unless you want to lose. And I'm really not sure that the key universities in the UK they are playing a crucial role in the future as well, but it's more collaboration in a new way, and I'm not sure at all, so what does it mean for the UK government? So will this Brexit ticket be more expensive than no one has dreamed?
Volta, hold, before you come in on that, just Volta, how does this, for the research and innovation part of what you do in Europe, how would Brexit affect a company?
Yeah, we have internally discussed several scenarios because we do not know whether this will be a kind of soft or hard Brexit, which may make a difference. But we are currently quite relaxed because, as I pointed out, our strategy is we look worldwide on the top researchers, on the top research ecosystem, innovation hub. And if this is in the UK, we don't care whether the UK is within or outside of the EU. For sure, for funded projects, as we are a big contributor, for instance, the 5G PPP, or meanwhile the big data PPP, it can make a difference. So this would be a pity if then good UK researchers are outside. Another detail, we have European Research Advisory Council, and one UCL professor is on it, and he will stay on it for sure. So we are relatively relaxed. What we see is more from the human resources side, that we have 18 sites in Europe, in 8 countries, including the UK, and we get more applications from UK researchers which don't have a UK passport. As many foreigners are working in universities, research organizations, they seem to be worried and obviously try to find a job.
So there's movement happening already.
Yeah, we see it in HR.
Well, Commissioner, I've given you lots of time to think about this now. What do you make of the British paper, British statement?
First of all, I haven't read the paper. I have to be honest that I knew that the paper was coming, but I don't know anything about what's the content of the paper of today. I think that we have to basically find a solution for the future. But the time for finding that solution for research and innovation is not yet there, because there's a lot of other subjects that have to be solved before. And so we have to keep our heads really cool, and we have to keep the calm, and we have to basically get emotions out, because we know that we need each other's. That the UK needs us and we need them in terms of research, science and innovation. And so we have to find a solution. But for the moment, can be a lot of papers, can be the rectors talking to the government in both sides, but it's not the time, because we are in the time of settling the divorce bill. And that's what's happening now. And so we will have to wait for that, and then we will, I'm sure that we will find a solution in these areas and in other areas, but we have to have a relationship that works. And I think that research, science, and innovation is a no-brainer, that we have to have a relationship that works. The point today is that we cannot really decide on anything. We cannot say how is it going to be, because we don't know. Because the first part is not solved. And the first part is about the people, is about the financial settlement, is about Northern Ireland. And so we will have to go through those. And so it'll be a little bit difficult, and we'll need patience. And so
but in that UK paper today, I know you haven't seen it, but they say nothing new on this question of the bill when it comes to Horizon. I mean, we were discussing this, that it continues to be. Well, how would you characterize what they're saying?
So I think you're looking at different parts of the British government. There's a team who are involved in the early phase of the negotiations who've got a certain stance and are making their case, rather like the Commission's negotiators doing in reverse, and we know that that's been difficult in the first phase. I believe that we can and will get through that in due course. The British government is, of course, arguing about the size of the bill. That's very political in the UK, and I think you have to understand that here in Europe, that if the Prime Minister tries to come up with too big a figure, then that's going to be a huge political problem for her and her government. So, of course, they're negotiating hard. That's their job. There will come a time when we've got through that, that we have to get through it. It will be madness not to get through it. And hopefully we come up with something that's good. And you know, universities, by the way, have been the most vocal about the rights of European citizens, because we have so many European citizens who work for us, who are a key part of our workforce and of course our students too. So we've been pushing the government very hard on that. I challenged Mrs. Thatcher in an open committee. Mrs. Thatcher, sorry. What a Freudian slip. I
shall go on and on.
I challenged in open committee about this issue and said, you know, why don't we be bold? Why don't we make the first move? So we're desperately keen to see those early phase issues resolved. And then there will come a time when we will need to do something positive together. And I guess what I'm going to suggest is that research and innovation and science should be a win-win all round, and it should not be that difficult to come up with an arrangement that works for both. So why don't we try and get the negotiations at an early stage after the first phase is completed onto a positive footing, and this area seems to me to be much easier than anything else, and much more benefit, much more obvious benefit to both sides as anything else.
Okay, so at this point, let's turn to the issue of the missions. Now, you raised that, Commissioner, and the Michael, you will soon be giving us a little example of one possible mission. But, Commissioner, so for those of you who aren't intimately familiar with the Lamy report, he proposed, the group proposed that there should be missions in the next framework program, which should foremost be easy to communicate and capture public imagination, should be open to all actors in R&I. He calls them moonshots, like the Apollo project. They should have breakthrough or transformative potential for science. And also they should integrate social sciences and humanities. Which always is added as if for a point of diversity, as opposed to, you know, the core to the whole program. But the question is, how do you see this working?
First of all, let's just a step back. Why, when the first conversations with Lamy about it were basically on his idea of this European identity. What makes us proud to be Europeans? I mean, why are we Europeans? Why do we like Europe? And I think that science is something that is part of our identity. Knowledge, the seek for knowledge, the scientists. But then we don't connect that with the people. And the idea of creating these missions came from different conversations with different people, where when we talk about science in Europe, we say we will invest more in renewables or we will invest more in materials. But that people don't understand in the street. We do understand, we like it. But the people in the street, they don't understand what's that. But if I say that I will be the first to have the first electric plane that can fly like Bertrand Piccard did himself, but he could invent the commercial one, then people will connect and they will basically feel that they are proud of being Europeans. And it came from a very particular situation that I discussed at a time with you, is when I was in Lisbon at some point, and there was these NASA tweets saying that NASA discovered 7 new planets, 3 in inhabitable place, and I discovered 10 minutes later that it was not it was NASA, was someone at NASA, was a Belgian scientist with ERC money. And, you know, and I said, how can it be possible that we don't connect? And so I think that it came from that idea. And then there was just one little story. When I was in Norway not long ago in a fantastic festival about science, by the way, called Starmus, there was one of the Nobel Prizes there that actually looked at me and said, you know, I think that this idea of the missions doesn't work. And I said, why? Look, when Nixon came with the idea of curing cancer, he never did. He found a lot of stuff that is essential for the cure of AIDS and for what we do about it. And I said, it's exactly that. It's not about the fact that we will find something. We can have a mission that we'll never achieve, but if we create the dynamics, the inspiration, then people will finally discover other things, but there will be that inspiration. So it has to be very concrete. We cannot create missions that are not concrete, but that's a problem because scientists don't like that. They don't want to be that concrete. And so I know it will be a bit of a struggle, but I'm sure that working together we can find things that inspire Europeans.
What do the rest of you think of missions? Can this work? Should it be done? Karen?
Well, when I saw it at first, I was very reluctant, but then I started to think about it, and there are some pros and cons. And one con is it should not be like silos where things do not really move and vibrate. So you should find missions that do not exclude too much, because you really have to have also just basic research that leads to nothing at the first time. But I do believe it could be inspiring indeed for people, both scientists and for also the public, because public opinion also plays a role, and the legitimacy of research and innovation is also an important part. That's one thing. And we live in a time where science and innovation leads to a lot of societal change. And this is something actually that we have to bring into our research at the first point, not late. So it's not a good idea, I think, for the further future that we try to have an innovation and then afterwards think, what does it do to the society, or how can we implement it? I think this should be part of the research from day one, and that's why I really also would advocate to have social sciences and humanities involved from day one. And that can be done if you have like an umbrella mission which comes bottom up and which is not fixing you but is inviting you to do something new.
Walter, what do you make of it?
I fully support it. It goes together with this example from DARPA with the grand challenges.
Yeah.
I would even suggest that we then support a little bit courageous, competitive approaches, 2 or 3, and not only
You mean
one.
2 teams are on the same goal?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because one thing is clear, we are talking about research. If it should be radical, there's some uncertainty. And as we have seen in the past, even if you think now you know this is the highest probability and you just fund this one, it can be the second or the third one which will finally be successful and make it into the market. So I would even suggest to combine for these moonshots 2, 3 teams which are supported financially.
Yeah.
I definitely strongly support the whole idea. Lamy report is a very good, because it starts with the ecosystem, place-based, so integrating the resources, creating a synergy between the different activities. And on this, if we take the Apollo moonshot example, so kind of putting a clear target and giving enough resources, make it so attractive, but so that we on one hand have the best science, engineers, researchers to join on that, so it needs to be attractive. But then as well, a lot of industrial actors, so that how to make that effective and fast as well, so but then the influence goes far beyond that project only. And it has a huge societal impact as well. So kind of what we have had now with Horizon 2020, we have had these 3 pillars, but the future is more on the ecosystem base, so it's more this collaboration, crossing the borders and getting people enthusiastic. And why this is important for the regions as well. So you said about the smart specialization. So we have around 200 regional smart specialization strategies. Each of these strategies define maybe 5 to 6 or so, 7, 8 focus areas. And most of these fit to the same. So there are big interest on the tackling the climate change. And so we can easily create one of those moonshots on this.
Oh, and that would involve structural funds then?
Structural funds, of course, and then get some of those regions who want to have this as their priority to focus and put their resources, put their best experts, and then bring the results back to their own region. Okay. So we would then come not only, let's say, a few of these moonshots, but a couple of handfuls, but this idea on having kind of competing teams. So that is good, so because then that's the healthy. Then we are getting a lot of global attractiveness with this, and we are attracting talents, people who are enthusiastic to come over to Europe, Chinese and the others, to make investments on this, because they are making investments on knowledge as well.
Okay, Commissioner, last question for you is simply though, but on the missions, who decides? That is to say, who decides what they should be? I mean, the Commission did this in FP7, right? I mean, it picked the BRAIN project, I mean, it picked, and there was a lot of complaints afterwards. And so how are you going to manage the politics of what could end up be, you know, a free-for-all of different interest groups?
Point number one, I think that the BRAIN project is an example of really something that is not really a mission, as I understand a mission, because people in the street will not understand what's that about mapping the brain. Okay. I mean, it's interesting for a scientist, it's interesting for people that like research, but for my mother or my grandmother, just mapping the brain, they just wonder why, but they will not understand why is it important. And so I think that the definition of the missions has to have a very clear criteria. It has to be done by people that know about it. It has to be created by the scientists. But I think that we have to have criteria that are clear, that they are inspiring, that they are concrete, and that they are actually horizontal, that they include the social sciences, and that they include the regions and geographies, and that you can actually get people inspired by it. And I think that we don't need, and just to be clear, I don't think that everything will be a mission. I don't think that will ever work. We have to have a couple of missions. We have to like 10 missions. Let's imagine 10 missions where we will achieve 2 or 3 will be great. I think that would be something very, very unique. And we know that most of those missions we'll never get to the place we wanted in the first place. So it's actually to get the dynamics of the communication in between the European Union and the people. How do you connect that? But then you will have fundamental research, blue sky that we don't know. It's not a mission. And just to reassure you on that, and that is extremely important for Europe, but probably to have these 10 or 11 missions where people get inspired. I think that's extremely important for the future, because I think that what's lacking in this generation is that people, at the end of the day, they have everything. They have the digital world, they have everything around them. We know and we have immense knowledge, but we don't feel the same sense of purpose that people felt in the past. So it's always about that. And so don't take it as something that will just have all the Horizon 2020 in terms of missions. We'll have a couple, and I say a couple in terms of 10 or 11 or 20, whatever the number we want, knowing that we will eventually achieve 2 or 3, and that will be so good for Europe, and people will feel proud about it and proud about the future.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
At this point, Michael, would you give a submission? Please, you can take your seats.
Thank you.
Michael is going to talk about a dementia mission. This will be followed by another speaker on a obesity issue, and then a third one on ocean research. So this is just to give a little flavor of possible missions. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. So let me first say that I do think this is about connecting science back to the people and achieving something that people would like, and something about the excitement of science and the public understanding the excitement of tackling something big. So to my mind, a moonshot is regarded by most people as something that's almost impossible to achieve, but it has a big goal. And I'm going to suggest to you the mission of dementia, but I'll explain a little bit more about why and a little bit more about what I mean. And I guess where I'm coming from is that we're looking for something that with a huge effort, with teamwork, with collaboration, and with sufficient time and investment and pulling together teams across Europe is something that can nevertheless be achieved. And I subscribe to that book by Warren Venus about teamwork, and I like his notion that, you know, if we work hard together, we can definitely make a small dent in the universe. Why dementia? Well, it's a huge problem. I'm going to give you some UK figures, and you can do the multipliers for Europe. But there are now 1 million people in the UK suffering from dementia. It's now a more common cause of death than heart disease, and it is the disease that the British public are most frightened about. They're much less frightened about cancer than they are about dementia. So it's immediately got the attention. And almost everyone in this room, I hazard to guess, has got at least one person in their family with dementia. So it is a huge problem. We all get it. We all understand the importance of it. It's also economically massively important. It's estimated that the UK will spend £1 trillion on dementia care through the NHS and through social care systems in the next 40 years. So it's massive. So I'm told by the health economists that if you can delay the onset of symptoms, so curing dementia is more than a moonshot, that's a Mars shot, I think, but slowing it down, identifying it early and slowing it down is possible. And if we can slow it down so that symptoms are delayed for 5 years, you'll halve the suffering and you'll halve the care costs. So that would give the United Kingdom, over the next 40 years, an extra £500 billion sterling. Same in euros these days, isn't it? It used to be a lot more in euros, but not anymore, especially through the Eurostar system. So that would give us an extra 500 billion over 40 years to spend on other aspects of science. Maybe we could spend some of that on the EU. So it's a huge issue. Now, I happen to come from a university that's got a huge effort in dementia already, and hence me choosing it. There is a big national effort in the UK already, but I think that this should be a much more globalised effort. I think it would be ideal for this sort of mission and moonshot, and I think it would be multifaceted. I'm not going to go into the science because I'm not a neuroscientist, but some very basic principles pertain. It's a disease that presents late. By the time you've got symptoms, you've already got quite advanced disease in your brain. We know from the congenital causes that beta-amyloid protein is a very important factor in all of this, and we know that you can pick up many changes in the brain with advanced imaging techniques long before symptoms develop. We also have a number of candidate drugs which have been tried in late disease but have never been tried in early disease. We also know that you can pick up the early stages of dementia with screening tests. So we've been doing some joint work with Deutsche Telekom about a game that goes on your iPhone that basically measures your ability to orient yourself in space, which is one of the very first symptoms of very early dementia, depicted beautifully in that film, Still Alice, where the professor goes running around her own campus and gets lost, if you remember that part of the movie. Now, you can pick that up, you can, and in fact, some 2 million people have played that game. All of that data from that game has gone into Deutsche Telekom and UCL's research bank, so we now know what the normal range is for almost every age range for spatial orientation. So that could, for example, be used as a test to pick up very early disease. That would identify an abnormal population who could be screened. Amongst those would be people who would be willing to take experimental medication. We do, of course, need to know a lot more about the basic science. So I see a moonshot that is focused on early diagnosis, methodologies to identify the disease early, a moonshot that includes a lot of work on the basic science of how the brain becomes injured in dementia, and that will lead to new treatments, and of course its immediate clinical translation. And I think that that will need ultimately a Europe-wide effort, and I do believe that we could achieve this goal in the time frame of, say, 1 or 2 framework programs. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 or 2 questions. There will be more that we'll take after, but any immediate question on this? Well, I got an immediate question myself, and how realistic is it? I mean, you know, Nixon famously declared the war on cancer, you know, and we're still fighting it.
I think it's entirely realistic. There are already some national efforts. I'm aware of a big national effort in Germany. I'm aware of a big national effort in the UK. So we are the hub. UCL is the hub for a dementia research institute, which has 6 hubs around, 6 centres around the UK. UCL as the hub. There's £300 million in that venture already. 190 million from government and 100 million from 2 major charities. So it's already starting. So it's not as though we've got to start from scratch. What we've got to do is start by bringing together everything we've already got, then coming behind it sufficiently with the appropriate funds to make it really motor.
Okay, all right. So, well, thank you very much, Michael. We'll come back to, we'll bring all the 3 of you up at the end for any further questions you might have, but thank you very much. This is just supposed to give you a little idea concretely of what is possible if we're talking about missions. Next is Karin Dahlman-Wright. She's the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Karolinska Institutet. Karin, where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay, all right. I didn't see you right there in the front row. Please, Karin, go ahead.
So, coming from a medical university, of course, I have to talk about a medical-related moonshot. But I really want to put it in a very different perspective, that a medical university is actually cannot work alone nowadays. We have to work with all over the world and other faculties, clearly. So my moonshot would then be to reduce obesity and associated metabolic complications by 90%. First, I thought about the 0 vision, but then I thought it probably was completely unrealistic. And I think this is also something which is very dear to our hearts also. I thought we can focus on the children. I personally is very interested in the children, how we make sure that children move about. We make sure that they get exercise, don't sit with the telephones all the time, so I'll come back to that also in a minute. I think this is also important to remember that this is actually a condition associated with our new lifestyles, which should somehow be possible to achieve it. But of course I come from a university that with a vision to contribute to the improvement of human health. But we do this as research and education, but we have to translate this into society. And we need actually our knowledge and our know-how and our research and our innovation to really come into a society which understands what this is all about. So we have to come together as a university with commercial actors and the society, and that way we can play a central role. So now I start, so we are of course a medical university, but to really approach this moonshot, we need to work in behavior scientists. How does society actually work? We need to make sure that our cities are adopted for activity. This is not something that we do research on our own. We need to make sure that sports is available to all through some means. And then, of course, we have to do genetic and look at environmental influence and molecular changes. And this, of course, we have to do all together in a global world, and this is what I work on myself. But with medicine alone is not enough. So we need natural sciences, we need medicine, we need humanities, and we need social scientists. And we should also remember that prevention goes before and is actually more important than treatment. I'll see if I can move this, then I can. Then, of course, we want now to translate this innovation, and we want to translate it into personal advice, which is another type of innovation in a way. It's innovate, you sell your time, your knowledge. We need to produce digital measuring devices, digital supporting devices. And I think also we know all that, I think one of the best inventions last year was the Pokemon, which at least made my children walk more than they ever walked before. So I think we have a lot of tools like that. We need to think about transportation. How do we make it easy for people to move around, to walk a little bit, not to be scared? How do we make sure the schools are not situated in such a way that it becomes dangerous for the children to walk to school? So we need to facilitate activity. We need to think about food products, of course. This is very natural. And altogether, we will also eventually, which is a classical think of way of innovation in this field, is of course drugs and diagnostics. But what I want to show with this, I think there's really so much more that we should do together. So all this is really a multi-sector approach. It's all about technology, it's about city planning, it's about medicine, it's about how we live. So it's really a cross-sectional, sectorial approach. So how do we get really innovation to matter? Well, we have to make sure that the new knowledge that we produce, the technologies that we produce, the methods that we do, that they reach all and everyone. If they only reach a certain part of the society, it's no good. It has to be possible to reach everybody. It has also, all the knowledge also has to be translated, I think, into society which is actually set and prepared to receive this knowledge. We have to assure that for innovation to really matters, that society is prepared to receive it. Knowledge, I think, that reaches into a society which is not equipped to understand it will not be useful. So we have to prepare the society. We have to reach out into the whole society to approach the root causes of the inequalities that we see in health today's societies. How do we know? How are new methods and knowledge accepted? How will we know that we really reaches out to everybody? And how, of course, do we secure the necessary ethical debate in society? Some methods, maybe not in this particular field, but in other fields, really raise very difficult ethical concerns. So we actually need also to research on how knowledge, technologies and methods are absorbed and put to good use by the individual and society at large. So sometimes I remember last year, a little bit later in Kyoto, I actually gave a talk on smart cities. But we don't only need smart cities, we actually need smart and just cities. We need cities where we can actually achieve our goals. So, so for innovation to matter, so innovation in the middle, of course we need solid knowledge, but we also need a prepared society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karin.
It's a little different.
It's difficult to clap a microphone. This is interesting. I mean, clearly, as you pointed out, the social sciences would be heavily involved in this issue, but also regulation and taxation. I mean, could a mission like this get involved with issues like a tax on sugary drinks and you know, this kind of thing? In a mission, should there be a regulatory dimension also?
Yeah, you're right. And of course, the mission should suggest such changes, but that again, then we go into political changes. But that is, of course, part of our knowledge. If we can show that will make a change, based on evidence. I mean, everything we should do should be based on evidence. So if we can show that if you somehow reduce sugar, we can evidence-based show that this is better, improves health, then I think we have a very good background material to actually bring to our politicians at the country and at the European level, and hopefully that will make a difference.
Okay. Any question from you? Yes, right there.
Maybe just one. My name is Ramon Wies, Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm. I agree. I mean, it's really important that we emphasize the social sciences, but I think we shouldn't forget engineering.
But that was my smart cities, how they are built.
Yeah, but in your first slides, I think we all have to work together, and I think they need to be part of it.
It should have been natural, technological, and medical, but I think I emphasize very much the
interesting dialogue between KTH and Karolinska on this issue.
We've never met before.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Karin. Next is Lisandro Benedetti Cecchi, who is the Vice Rector of the University of Pisa. Lisandro.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon. My moonshot mission has a blue glow, so making ocean and sea is our home. Humans have a long history of interaction with the ocean. Life originates from the ocean, and the ocean regulates life in many different ways. They control the climate. More than half of the oxygen we breathe from the atmosphere is produced by the activity of these tiny organisms that live in the water column, phytoplankton. Our society relies on the ocean for many different things: energy, food, materials, molecules. We use the surface of the ocean for transportation and trade. So it's not surprising that about 70% of human population lives within 100 kilometers from coastlines. But the way we interact with the ocean, the way we use the ocean has not changed substantially in the last 50 years. And we are impinging always on the same resources, and in many cases in an unsustainable way. So why is this so? Because we can only use what we know, and we know very little about the ocean. We have better maps of the moon surface or the surface of Mars compared to maps of the seafloor. We spend more money to search for exogenous life in space than we invest to understand life in the ocean. The oceans are complex systems. They change rapidly but unpredictably. And we are not treating them very well. We are filling them with garbage, plastics. The oceans are getting warmer, more acid. All these changes will affect life in an unknown way. The way we monitor the ocean nowadays is largely based on techniques that generate very fragmented data. Of course, we have satellites that offer full coverage, but the signal doesn't penetrate the seawater. So to get information about what happens below the surface of the water, we use and rely mostly on acoustic techniques. So acoustic techniques on ships or acoustic techniques on mooring, but they generate fragmented data. We need a disruptive innovation in the way we observe the ocean. And this requires developing techniques and bringing the same techniques, digital revolution that has changed our life on Earth, under the water. Ocean cyber infrastructure is a way. And there are pilot studies already that have started using and exploring these possibilities. One is in the US, funded by NASA and the NSF, and the other in Canada. And in this project, thousands of kilometers of cables have been deployed in the sea to collect any sort of data with many different kinds of sensors to measure the chemistry and the physics of the water. Less so about the biology. Development of biological sensors are not as well developed so far. But here the analogy with weather forecast is appropriate. Our ability to predict the weather has increased dramatically and enormously in the last decade as a result of investment to generate networks of observatories, to monitor the atmosphere in an unprecedented way, to generate big data. We need to apply the same philosophy to the study of the ocean. And when we do that, we are in the position to understand long-term changes in the ocean, the impact on climate and ecosystems, and to predict significant events like earthquakes or tsunami. if we have that understanding, we'll be in a position of using the ocean as part of the solution to increasing demands of a growing human population. Human population is projected to be well beyond 9 billion people by 2050. Human growth is one problem. The other problem is the redistribution on Earth of humans. If global warming continues, and there is nothing to suggest the opposite, many regions that are in arid status nowadays will become totally inhospitable in 20, 30 years or even less. So people living in those regions have to move. And where will they go? What will they eat? The oceans may offer part of the solution, space for living and food. Again, if we do that, or to get there, we need to understand the ocean and be able to predict change in the ocean in a much better way. We already have some floating villages existing in different regions of the world. We just have to make them better and larger and to develop really smart cities on the ocean. And this will affect the way in many different ways our lifestyle and the way we use the ocean, for example, for space and food. So make the oceans our home is an overarching goal. It needs to be broken down in operational tasks. These tasks are develop networks of ocean observatories, invest to foster research and innovation, bring the digital revolution under the water. And there is enormous scope for technological development and innovation here. Of course, a moonshot mission has to have an impact and to involve people. People like to watch the stars, the sky, because it's fascinating, it's mysterious, and they can see it. The ocean is also fascinating and mysterious. The problem is that most people cannot see it. With developing cyber infrastructure, we'll bring the ocean on mobile devices to the lay people. And this has enormous potential to get people involved in ocean life in many different ways and many different aspects, with impacts and prospects to develop a citizen science and impact on education and outreach. So with this understanding and this innovation, we can make a better life and use the ocean to solve future problems associated with our growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Question? One question that I had is, was there one? I missed it. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Thank you. Jackie Wood from the Joint Programme Initiative on Oceans and Seas. So perhaps you'd expect me to intervene at this point. But the Joint Programme Initiatives, I will make it a question. Joint Programme Initiatives are a parallel to the EU funding because whilst 15% or so of EU research budgets are channeled through the Horizon 2020 programmes, the vast percentage otherwise, 85%, is still within funds in the member states, and particularly in institutionalised funding in universities, in research centres. Joint programme initiatives were set up in 2011 to address some of this and to allow the member states to come together, align their research and set up joint strategic research and innovation agendas. So the main point I wanted to make initially is that each of these areas that have been presented to us this afternoon are already the subject of joint programme initiatives in neurodegenerative diseases, in healthy diet, healthy lives, and in my own area, JPI Oceans. Okay. So the question is, how can we use the joint programme initiatives to build on and address these challenges that you've presented today? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the last part of your question. How can we do this?
How can you build on the existing programs, such as she was referring to make that happen?
Well, what I've been described is not really exist as a full program. There are pilot studies started in 2014, sorry, in the US. It's called the Neptune Project. And as far as I know, there is nothing fully developed out of that. And there is another pilot in Canada. So we are really at an early stage. So really the mission of the Moonshot mission is to have cyber infrastructure for the ocean by 2030.
So, okay, so could that mean, for instance, like a permanent base station at the bottom of the ocean?
To deploy cable and sensor in the ocean in a very extensive way to understand the ocean in a more, I mean, the data we get now are very sparse in space. We need to have full coverage to understand and be able to predict the behavior of the ocean.
Okay. All right. Okay, could the other two speakers just come up here?
Or I can make it more simple.
Yes,
put the Wi-Fi under the sea.
Does it come with coffee?
That's the enormous challenges. But
could the other speakers just come up here? Yeah. Michael and Karin. Any further questions? Please come up. Do you still have your microphones? Yeah, okay. This concept of missions. So, do you buy it? Yes.
Jan Pomorski, Secretary General of the Guild of European Research Intensive Universities. I have a question in sense to all three panelists. I think one of the, so I've been very inspired by some of these examples, and I think it's really helpful to begin that process of thinking through what this might mean. I guess one big concern is, again, when we talk about interdisciplinarity in arts and humanities. So I was, in some ways, they clearly play into all of those areas. But there's still a question about how we can really ensure that they are integral to these projects and that they're not footnotes in a sense. And I just wonder whether, and part of these issues are structural in terms of, if we define these headline goals in a scientific way, then you might have a bit of arts and humanities at the edges, but in a sense the sort of hard sciences will always lead the way. And I just wonder if you have any good examples of any advice for the Commission and for us all in thinking this through about best practices from your own institutions or from your national context about how to ensure that these projects and these missions are truly interdisciplinary.
How do you make them interdisciplinary?
No, the true answer to your question is actually no, and that's partly why I actually put it as a moonshot, because I think that is something we have to work on to make it fully integrated, to integrate, from the science via innovation and make the whole society really being prepared. And I don't think we have that, so that's why I put it as a moonshot, actually, part of the reason for that.
But actually, a little more provocatively, Jan, why should it be interdisciplinary? I mean, that is to say, it was defined in the Lamy paper as being a moonshot to inspire people. Wouldn't the kind of the PR aspect of it come first? Like, for instance, Lisandro, with your ocean one, I remember as a child, what interested me in the ocean? Jacques Cousteau. So how do you get a Jacques Cousteau in ocean science today who will inspire people? Your project?
Well, you don't need just one Jacques Cousteau. You need many Jacques Cousteau, all very well connected. I think that, well, you can inspire people in many different ways, and Jacques Cousteau probably inspired inspired me as well, because it was a different time and information was delivered in different ways. So one person could make a difference. Nowadays, we have much more access to information that flows very, very quickly, and so because of the technology, and then we can capitalize on this. And the other thing is that about multidisciplinarity, I think for the ocean, for the idea I just described, there is the analog, which I also mentioned, about meteorological, the networks of meteorological stations. Our accuracy and precision in predicting weather forecast has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, just because of investment, because we can generate big data from networks of observatories. We don't have to invent, apart from the technology of bringing all this philosophy underwater. The structure and the multidisciplinarity and the interaction are already in the example with weather forecasts.
Yeah. Michael, any last comment?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, and very difficult to answer. I guess I come up with two or three things. Involve everyone from the outset. So when we're starting a grand challenge approach at UCL, we start very broad. We don't say the problem we're trying to solve is. We say the broad area that we're interested in is as follows. And if you think you can contribute to that area, please come along to the start of this process. So that's number one. Keep it open as you can for as long as you can. Another fairly golden rule: you can have fantastic interdisciplinary ideas, but a little bit of market analysis for what's needed and whether or not there's funding out there beyond the initial startup funding that somebody like me might put into initiating a grand challenge is crucial. And then I'd say the number one thing about the difference between those that fly and those that don't is leadership. So talented leadership that is used to working in a way that is very open and that is very supportive of other scientists is a critical factor. And if you get those three things right, then you start to make a little bit of progress.
Okay, thank you very much. Karin,
can I just ask, for example, when it becomes very interdisciplinary, for example, by making nice training clothes, can you get children to actually move about better? And of course, then we think this is interesting, but then we have to do an evidence-based study on this to really show that is the case. So that is, I think, a way to really involve the society.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I much appreciate your ideas. We will publish little reports on this, but we will move on to the next session. And I'm sorry, there are some other questions, but we will try to address them after as well. So thank you very much. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Marlene Fiaschi, Managing Director of Science Business.
All right, thank you. I think we need to mic up the other speakers. So we've heard about the money. We've heard about moonshot missions that could be game changers for Europe. All good and well, but is it of any use if we don't have a true innovation market for Europe? So in Europe, going back to the Lamy report, it states, and I would quote here, lagging behind on innovation is a more serious problem for Europe today than it was in the past. And then comes a series of market-related areas where Europe falls behind. For instance, Europe spends less than half as much on business R&D compared to South Korea. It produces less than 3 times high-quality patent applications than Japan. Or the amount of venture capital available in Europe is less than 5 times compared to the US. So with that state of affairs in mind, the question on the table for the last panel is going to be how to build a real innovation marketplace in Europe. So can I call the 4 speakers in the last panel? And is everybody mic'd up? Yes. Yep. You are? Yeah? Mic'd up but not turned on. Now it's turned on. Welcome. Good, thank you. So I'll introduce the 4 distinguished speakers we now have on stage. So first, Andreas Hebert, your regional technical officer at Microsoft. Next to you, Eva Grut-Andal, your head of EU government affairs as advisor. Then Jan Collier, you are director of operations at the high value manufacturing Catapult in the UK. And on your left, Luc Sauté, your professor and former rector magnificus at University of Maastricht. Thank you very much to the 4 of you for joining us. And before we kick off that part of the discussion on market, just back to what Rich was saying at the beginning, we at Science Business, together with some members of our university industry network, are launching a new consultation group on innovation markets. So the scope is A, to study the challenges of creating such a marketplace for innovation, B, identify what would be the conditions necessary to build this market, and C, identify or propose possible solutions. So that will be done through a series of roundtables and reports, starting in November already in the field of life sciences, but we'll go through different sectors. And, well, if you're interested to know more, come and find us. So markets, innovation markets now. Luc, can I start with you actually? What's wrong with the markets in Europe? Why isn't it more innovation friendly?
Well, what's characteristic of Europe is really that market creating innovations are basically the big deficit as compared to other countries. Well, the light is on, but I don't know whether that's sufficient.
Do you have the green light? Yeah?
Yes, but it should be on, no? Anyway, let me
back?
let me use an alternative mic. So the issue about, you see, what characteristic of Europe is really the lack of market creating innovations. So Europe is really characterized by incremental innovations, very strongly in a number of sectors. And you see this gap is reflected in many areas where you would have assumed that Europe would grow very much in new areas, new markets, new firms, and the scaling up is rarely emerging. And I think this is really why, for me as an economist, research and innovation is characterized by, in a most dramatic form, costs of non-Europe. And I think the question which was raised last, actually, on this joint programming in oceans is illustrative of the issue. In the research area, we try to work towards a European research area as if this is just a single market in research. And you know, when you compare the statistics, you just gave them about comparing us with Korea or with the US. We add up all the research expenditures of the 28 member states, even in some countries of the regions. And we do as if this is one country. But of course it isn't. And clearly there is a lot of overlapping of research. And the issue raised about joint programming, which you raised in ocean research, is illustrative of the fact that we are on the one hand competing for research, and on the other hand we are collaborating on research, and we have funding national, sometimes regional, and in Europe. And at the innovation level, the issue is to some extent even worse, but in a different format. We have if you remember, we discussed the innovation union, as if we would have a union in which innovation would be easily transferable, scaling up, etc. But there are basically three areas where which confront any kind of innovation in Europe to scale it up rapidly at the European level, and which prevents these market-creating innovations. One is, of course, the single market regulations affecting innovation outside of manufacturing, and in some services where we lack basically the access to a unified European market. The second is, of course, regulation, which is again, the Commission introduced the notion of innovation principle, innovation deals, green deals as experimentation, allowing to allow new markets to emerge out of this regulatory sandbox, as we say. And the third is, of course, the lack of European procurement. I mean, just to give you one link to the previous discussion on missions, and going outside of the technology and research area. In my country, the Netherlands, we had just last week a big discussion whereby the insurance companies, the health insurance companies, and the hospitals achieved an agreement to buy in pharmaceutical products jointly, and hence reduce the costs, the health costs, etc. In this country, there's been a whole discussion in the last days about how one can reduce the health budget with alternative generic medicines bought in, etc. Each country is discussing the procurement or buying in pharmaceutical products, and each country, depending on its size, is of course in no position to debate with the pharmaceutical companies a lower price. So what better than not a technology mission, but a European mission to say we buy in medical products at the European level. But we lack in our treaties, we lack, of course, that we have no European procurement. And so it's not just DARPA, but it's in every of these single areas that we deal with fragmented public procurements, and that we hence fail to create conditions for really market-creating innovations to emerge at the European level. So this is also my link to the missions, and why we need really to tackle the two things, not just the missions and making to the public the attractiveness of moonshots, but also to settle the economic barriers to achieve those missions.
And since you're on the pharmaceutical example, Eva, can I turn to you? What do you think for life sciences are the main barriers for the market uptake of innovative medicine in Europe?
Well, I mean, I would just say to the previous speaker that we are not at liberty to set our prices for medicines. You know, we do negotiate with governments, and you have a very strong role in actually setting the prices for medicines. And if there is no agreement, well, we'll have to, you know, it is a bargaining process. It's just not us setting our prices any way we like. So maybe just setting that straight. But I think, you know, Europe needs to nurture its competitive edge. And there are many prerequisites for leadership in the life science area in Europe. We have some of the best universities here today in Europe, and we have excellent science. We have highly skilled workforce. We have the number of high-tech patents in Europe is impressive. But I would say, and for instance in my field, in the area of vaccines, for instance, 80% of vaccines are produced in Europe. We have absolutely a leading edge in that area, and also in the area of biotech. There's a very strong manufacturing base, and so. But the problem is, as we see it, that a lot of our strength in Europe are on the supply side. So education, infrastructure, and so on. The demand side is actually a problem, and that kind of goes to your issue, that there isn't a sufficient uptake of innovative medicines in Europe, and it kind of goes to the point that particularly in a time when growth in Europe is low and there are challenging budgets, and we understand that perfectly, of course, but it still encourages countries to look at health as a cost and not as an investment. Not only health of the individual, but also as an investment for economic growth. And I mean, the moonshot on dementia, for instance, we'll have a population that will be growing very old, and which is a good thing, but the old age dependency ratio will double by 2060, and there will be fewer than 2 working age persons to support each person over the age of 65. So you need to keep people healthy, and medicines has a role to play, and innovative medicine has a role to play there as well. So I would say there's a lot of things that work well. Another point that I just wanted to mention, maybe, and we've heard that previously from other speakers, but 2/3 of the worldwide venture capital investment in high-growth biopharma startups, they're in the US, they're not here. There's about 19% in the European Union, but 55% is in the US. And this is well documented, and something that Europe needs to address if they wanted to pick up some more investment in startups. So, again, not to dominate, but there's a lot of positives. But from our perspective, honestly, there's a problem with uptake as well. Because if you invest in a market, you want to be able to sell your products. Yeah. And if there isn't a market, you may want to go somewhere else.
But Eva, can we say that there was some progress made with the European Medicine Agency or with the current IP framework in Europe? Are there things that do help the market uptake?
I mean, yes, Europe has world-class IP standards, but it is actually something that's under discussion right now. Do we have the right IP framework in Europe? Is it too generous? And I know this is a debate that has been spurred again by the fact that some particular member states, I have to say, find that the prices of medicines are too high. And so they're looking to whether or not the problem is with the IP framework, or is it actually more related to negotiating the right level of pricing. But decreasing the standards of intellectual property is not going to solve that issue. It will deter investment in Europe, and we certainly hope that Europe will make its, analysis and maintain the intellectual property rights that we have, and the leadership that Europe has provided, on issues like IP, and also actually when we are negotiating free trade agreements with other other countries, be it in Asia or elsewhere.
We can come back on the conditions, really, on what is needed to create this innovation marketplace. Andres, can I come to you? Actually, same question. Is the digital single market going in the right direction for the ICT sector?
I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and from my perspective, living in a kind of global company as a European one, Europe is really at the leading edge of thinking through how comprehensive the digital transformation of society, the digital transformation of economies, and you see it in all the kind of regulation coming up like the GDPR, which I think is really leading edge what Europe is delivering here, to think through how can we build a solid foundation that the fundamental human rights are being protected. On the other side, we are creating the infrastructure that basically the economy can transform in a way. But I would like to get back to the innovation part. There's so many ways how to measure innovation, and at one point in my kind of simplistic world, you can measure innovation in the way how many things you can add at the front end of your journey going forward. The other way to measure innovation is how many things are you able to leave behind. And I do think that we have a significant opportunity in Europe, given all the basically legacies and traditions, that we should look at how can we use innovation to leave things faster behind. I don't know, just as a kind of guess, how many laws are still in existence and applicable, which has been written before 1900, which might not be very useful for the kind of adding stuff up front in a way. So having a kind of potential additional focus on the back end of the innovation journey is something which could accelerate basically the speed of the train we are embarking on. The second thing is around the long tail of innovation. I'm consciously using this term, long tail, not of science, but of innovation, because we have such a solid scientific kind of environment in innovation, scientific environment, producing knowledge and information in this way, but we are somehow lacking versus other geographies in turning this knowledge into innovation that's applicable, creating economic values, societal values in a way. And so, when I see in our partner landscape, we have about 40,000 partners here in Europe, and about 1,000 partners which are working in an important field for society called accessibility. Most of those partners are single-person companies, and those companies don't have the resources, don't have basically the access to get them to European funding in a way. So what can we do that those small companies who are creating innovation get access in very lightweight process, that basically their organizational structure, being a single-person company, inventing stuff for parts of society which are very, very important, have access to this innovation stuff.
Just on funding, what type of funding are you referring to? Is it private or public?
I think it's a combination on this one, but I do think that the overhead for getting access to public funding is leaving a significant part of our basically research community, which is sometimes this kind of applied research community, and inventors out of the equation, which I do think we have an opportunity to improve on this one. The last thing around innovation is that quite often I see many projects in Europe doing what I would call innovation in an area which becomes potentially a solution. And if you look at what's happening currently in the digital domain on the evolution of business models, the evolution of economic models in a way, I think there could be a better, let's say, focus around creating platforms of innovation. So that, for instance, if a research project is creating something, that's not creating an innovation solution, but it's creating an innovation platform that others can build upon. And this kind of network and layered, basically leveraging of multiple platforms is normally creating a much faster adoption cycle. So I do think that this could be, going forward, improved in Europe.
Okay. Yeah, and can I come to you? So you're representing the manufacturing sector. Are there any specific areas that you'd like to highlight, or barriers to market uptake of innovative goods? Because that's manufacturing is a tough sector for Europe. Competition is pretty hard around the world.
I think that's true, and I feel a little bit, coming from the UK, if you like, a little bit of a test case in some ways.
It's okay,
because
don't worry.
I don't think it's much of a secret that the UK has had its own problems in terms of how to stimulate its market, how to capture innovation, how to promote that. And I think we've taken some steps. So it was a really interesting comment from my colleague here about the fragmentation of things. And whilst you can add up lots of small pieces, they don't necessarily make the same whole as putting it all in one place. So I think, I think there is a definitely it feels, anyway, an easier market maybe in manufacturing, and the innovation in technology, I think that's more open perhaps than in some of the other areas. And I think that's because it's such a dominant number in terms of the contribution to the European income. And I think that we've done quite a lot of work to resolve some of the, perhaps the barriers around regulation and standards, which I think has helped to open that up. I think the Lamy report makes some interesting comments about simplification. Yeah. Even from a UK perspective, I'm still asking for somebody to show me the wiring diagram that actually links up all these bits that are supposed to contribute and how they go together, and I think that again can come back into that model. So I think there's that clarity of the system and how the system works, and I think if you're going to encourage people, you've got to do some of the inspirational stuff around missions, certainly, but you've got to allow the people at that lower level to get engaged. And to do that, a lot of it's about access to capability, access to skills, access to, or acceptance of a managed level of risk. And I think with our program in the UK, the Catapult program, it was specifically about trying to share the risk with innovators, recognizing that as we would say, you're going to kiss a lot of frogs, but they're not all going to turn into princes. So you've got to be prepared to support organisations that are going to fail in that long-term mission. So I think it's.
But Ian, to do more risk, what are the conditions, the necessary conditions from an economic or a market point of view to create this area where innovators can take more risk?
I'm perhaps not quite understanding the question there.
The conditions, the market conditions. So the risk, the need for innovators or entrepreneurs to take more risk is something that we hear a lot here in Brussels, and especially in the policy discussions. But what is needed to make room for risk-taking innovation?
I think you've, as we've said, you've got to, in that risk, it can't all lie wholly on the innovator, because I think you'll cut off the seed corn that's coming through. I think you've got to have clear routes for development, clear routes as to how that funding potentially can grow and support. I think you've got to have open markets. I think that's really important, and I think that requires the standards and regulations bit that we talked about, the harmonisation across there. And I think the other element is how you support the risk and scale up. Because I think there is, if the UK can show you anything, it's that we're pretty good at coming up with good ideas and inventing things. We're pretty rubbish at actually turning that into value added from a UK economy point of view. So it's about, and our initiative is about trying to plug some of that gap. So I think you've got to have that freedom of movement within the market, ideally, for knowledge, and that's particularly in the heads of people. And you've got to be able to access the resources and facilities you need to work with that. And I think that fosters market development.
Okay, and an open question to the panel. Do you think we need one single market for innovation in Europe, or do we need specific single markets by sectors?
Well, just to, I think that because also to apologize to Mrs. Koutandal, I did not mean at all that in the current system firms would not be in a bargaining power with each of the countries in terms of a political sense to fix their prices. But it's for me, as an economist, pretty obvious that if you were to add each of the member states and you bargain between your company and 500 million, a representative of the 500 million, probably the bargain would be different than when you do it with, say, a country like the Netherlands in 60 million. Huh? And the same for Belgium, of course. So this is where I mean that a single market, which of course is not allowed in the treaties, and we have different health insurance schemes, and we have different systems of academic hospitals and regional hospitals, etc. We have a complete fragmented system in the health sector, because that's what we left to individual member states, that puts it as a disadvantage in terms of getting a price in terms of pharmaceutical products. That's the only thing I wanted to say. And these kind of issues are really behind a really issue where, as economists, we call this costs of non-Europe. And I think this is different from sectors, between sectors. I mean, in the manufacturing sector, with the single market going back to 92, we do have quite clear rules about trade, etc. And hence, also in Brexit negotiations, this is a central issue that we don't want to lose those gains of having a Europe. But in these many other areas, we are way behind having a Europe. And in economic terms, this is a cost. This is clearly a cost. If you simply bring it back to what the Commissioner was saying also about how much we invest in research. Think of the National Institutes of Health in the US, 30 billion, and what the Commissioner mentioned here, the 10 billion. The impact of our 10 billion, or the impact of our research, and you see this in the productivity figures, is way below the US or China or Korea in terms of having the impact with the same amount of research on productivity or growth. And that is really an organizational, institutional issue of fragmentation. So, for me, this is really something where policymakers, national policymakers, but also European ones, have to be really convinced that we as Europeans pay a cost of having this fragmented Europe. And that translates very much in the areas of research and innovation, and it will be very different from sector to sector, yes.
Okay.
May I add something? Oops. There are pluses and minuses for both kind of approaches, having a kind of common innovation market, because then you can seamlessly transition from one sector to the other one, and then there are benefits if you have more deeper kind of innovation in a kind of per sector one. One of the things which is happening in the ICT sector, which I'd like to get your attention to, is that since a couple of years, a new form of innovation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, is really getting attention and more momentum in a way. And when we see how machine learning is working and how we see how our partners, our competitors, ourselves are using this kind of technology, a single innovation market, meaning a single innovation or / data market, is much, much more effective versus fragmented, segmented kind of data assets, because machine learning depends critically on data size, and if Europe can agree that basically you have common access to the 27 or 28 kind of member states data assets that the research community can take a look in, the quality extracted from this insight is significantly higher versus having 27 or 28 individual fragmented kind of analytical approaches in this way. So I think going forward, at least for our sector in ICT, I would rather see the benefit on a common and basically unified innovation market versus having separated approaches.
Yes, Eva.
I have two microphones now. I want to agree with you definitely that in the life science healthcare sector we have a totally fragmented Europe. We have 28 individual markets, because pricing and reimbursement, healthcare, social security, that's all the competence of the individual member states. So there is no single market. You know, I'm well aware of some of the collaborations that you are referring to, I mean, it can make sense, I think, for countries with sort of similar GDP, similar market types, that you know, you work together in certain areas, particularly around some of the, I know this has particularly been in the area of very rare diseases, orphan diseases, or
but can the EU have a role in bringing these countries together?
No, I mean, I think for the moment, honestly, because of the way Europe is very much up to the individual member states. And what we're just saying, some of these collaborations that just have to take place, you know, following some principles from our view. So it certainly shouldn't be creating additional layers. It shouldn't, you know, how do you say, block the access to medicines for patients, because, you know, you have, you know, again, several negotiations which you will also have at national level, and there are a few other ones. But I think at European level, on the innovation, in the innovation space, I think the Innovative Medicines initiative has been, you know, I think a success story for our industry. There's some great things that are coming out there, and now we're discussing what the follow-up to IMI2 should be looking like.
And there are 9.
And that's quite exciting, I think. So.
Yes, please, yeah.
I find myself drawn back to my comment about a wiring diagram a minute ago, because I can't get comfortable with either as an exclusive solution. So I don't think you can have an innovation system which doesn't recognize the demands that exist in some sectors and allow those significant demands, particularly if they're substantive sectors, to be recognized. But I do think the part of the solution is about how you connect together those innovation activities. And I think it comes back to leveraging the investment. So I think in many of the, if we just take the dominant manufacturing sectors, aerospace, automotive, there's the benefit of leveraging the developments in individual sectors across other sectors. So you can take developments in those sectors into construction, for instance. I think it's about how you get much more efficiency and effectiveness from your research activity. So I think that part of the challenge is about recognizing the connectivity and working hard to facilitate that connectivity. Even, I would suggest, and given that collaboration is at the heart of innovation, even in the, perhaps in the sectors or the technologies which are not harmonized by virtue of current arrangements, I would have thought there's a lot of opportunity to promote that collaboration that links the benefits of working together that you'll get as a reward for all of the independent groups taking part in that process.
How can that be done? Communicating the success or the successful collaboration?
Well, I think you have to have a space. You know, you have to set out the intent to do so. You have to communicate that that's what you're looking for. You potentially have to oil the wheels of wanting to see collaboration going on in that area, and that's part of the risk money potentially we talked about earlier on. So I think, you know, I think it is. It's as much recognizing the need to focus on how the innovation system needs to evolve, hence the Lamy report maybe, as much as what's the individual project I need to work on, and blending those two things together.
A question to the industry. What do you think the role of the industry is in communicating this successful collaboration?
I think industry can play one role, it's not the only one, but one role in communicating basically the impact of innovation. And I'd like to focus a bit on the impact side, because quite often we've heard huge numbers being invested in R&I in Europe, in the billions of euros to support the different programs. But at the end of the day, it's an investment, it's the input factor to research and not the output factor. What we've done a couple of months ago, and it's publicly available, so you can take a look in case you're interested on your own PC. It's what we created is called the Microsoft Academic Graph. What we used was, we used basically search capability of the Bing engine, and we applied machine learning to let machines read 120 million scientific papers to complement the current basically referral system with a much more prioritized and focused kind of system to understand which academic output created what kind of follow on the prioritized list, what kind of, let's say, communities, where ended up in patents and all these kind of activities. So in case you're interested to check for yourself, again, we don't want to make any judgment saying this researcher, this institution is better than the other one, because this would be a can of worms if you would make this kind of statement, so we deliberately don't do that. You can download the data for yourself, you can see what algorithm we applied, you can change it to your own algorithm, and take a look how basically the kind of network of implications that somebody who created a very foundational kind of, let's say, scientific output has been taken up by others and eventually ended up to be, for instance, parts of the patent portfolio of European companies, which can then be leveraged to create economic impact in a way. So in case you're interested, we're really looking and trying to innovate in the measurement of innovation, and the academic graph is just one example of what we're doing.
Eva, what do you think the role of the industry is?
Well, again, in my sector, I can just go back to say, I mean, at the European level and some of the programs around, for instance, the IMI, is very interesting and useful, and of course more than that, otherwise we wouldn't do it in the area of pre-competitive research. But when it comes to actually developing a product, a compound, this is done by private companies. This is very costly and very time-consuming. It takes many years, and I would say that if you look at the output over the last, say, 10 years, there has been some very innovative medicines coming out of the European Medicine, approved by the European Medicines Agency. Not just incremental innovation, but truly first in class, and also dealing with some of the transformative technologies. So, but that part, sort of taking it through the development phase and putting out the market, that's done by companies. That's not anything we have in the European sort of policy environment.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think there are different levels of responsibility in this discussion around innovation markets. So the EU, the member states, but also the different stakeholders. So that's an important component. Should we take a couple of questions, maybe from the audience? Yes, please. Okay. Can you identify yourself?
Tatu Koljonen from Aalto University. One question that you didn't, or dimension that you didn't touch, is this platform economy, that the digital platforms where Europe's market shares are less than 5% at the moment, and the very natural innovation marketplaces are around those platforms. And with IoTs and stuff, we see that all these traditional areas of health, energy, transport, IP finance and more will be transformed into digital, same form as the other industries that already have suffered in digital things. So shouldn't we be focusing on not just building innovation platform or innovation marketplaces, but building those succeeding platforms and attracting users to them, and that would be the core problem, and without that this is useless, building these innovation marketplaces.
I think this question targeted at me. The platform concept is a very broad one, and currently the most visible one is the digital platform kind of concept. But there are multiple versions of digital platforms. So there's the famous advertising platforms and the Uber model of basically having no resources whatsoever, just connecting different sides of the market. But there are other platforms as well. So for instance, product-related markets, and European companies play a significant role. Just take, I don't know if Siemens is in the room, but Siemens has a significant IoT digital platform as a product platform market in the digital space, in a way, really being one of the leading companies globally driving this kind of activity. So we do think that platforms are a good thing. There are multiple layers, building on top of it and leveraging the output of one platform to the next one becomes a kind of ecosystem in itself, in a way. But it is also a kind of political kind of focus area, that what can or should we do in Europe to foster and enable this kind of activity, and it's coming back to the fragmentation side. Platforms have an incredible benefit if you have a larger starting point to start with. So if then the member states decide to say, look, we would like to do it on our own, platforms by definition can't grow as fast if there would be a European common base on this one. So I do think the platform concept, at least at European level, could help create an understanding by the member states that together is better than alone, in this way. And this was the kind of idea behind the platform business, helping to get commonality by the 28 member states, or 27 soon, in this kind of direction.
Luc, did you want to come in on that? Yeah.
I don't know if we need...
Well, I think you really pinpoint one of the typical areas where there has been an enormous growth which has emerged across the world, and where Europe really failed completely. And I think that the whole area of a digital union where we are going now, we will be implementing it in the coming years. When the internet change occurred in '94, you could imagine we are sort of 20 years behind. So imagine Nokia and all the others, and see how the whole telecom area and the link to its mobiles, in which Europe was running ahead, has led to a situation where Europe is completely running behind. And for me, that's the illustration of a completely wrong-based policy, where we allowed liberalization of the telecom sectors by country, Denmark being one of the first, the UK, and the coordination being done a little bit, I would say, like in research with joint activities, but the essence of what we had before, of joint standards, of Nokia taking the lead, so to say, allowing a natural monopolist, giving that its network, to emerge, we never really addressed the political issues in terms of how we could facilitate this. And so what you then see is that these are global networks, and to some extent, the monopoly is characteristic of these global networks, and we as consumers all benefit from these digital platforms, and we can indeed develop apps, etc., but they will not be the engines of growth in Europe. And that is really, for me, the core issue, that why the whole structure of European integration is, to some extent, it has been wrongly based. It hasn't adjusted. We've stuck in treaties. So we have a common agriculture policy, whereas in my view, we should have a common research policy, because that's clear where open science is really, should be Europe at that European level. And we should, in other areas, we don't need a common agriculture policy, I would say, at this moment. We have international, but agriculture has a local content, much more important, etc. these days, but we're stuck in treaties. And that is really the drama of Europe, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Yeah, Boris, go ahead, but then we'll ask one more question, and I'd like to wrap up soon, so be brief, please.
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult. Boris Azais from MSD. I just wanted to go back to I was a bit surprised that joint procurement would pop up in this discussion, which is about how to build a real innovation marketplace across Europe. Because I see things like, building up purchasing power or creating monopsonic power in a marketplace as more like an efficiency play, okay? But I don't really see how it's going to attract more innovation or translate more of the science into products by having a single buyer. And we've seen, for example, in the US, when Hillary Clinton was implementing her child vaccine initiative in the 90s, basically in 10 years, the number of vaccine companies in the US went from about 30, 33 to 3. So those policies of single buyer are very effective, but they have an impact. They have an impact on the number of players, and potentially they have an impact on the flow of money coming from the marketplace through the pipeline in order to invest in new products. So that's where I wanted to make that comment, because we can talk about access, efficiency, budget management, but when it comes to creating a marketplace so that we translate the science into products, I'm not totally sure that a single buyer is the right policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just give one last question? And because we're running out of time, and we said we would finish at 5:15, and we're already over time. Brexit. We can't speak about a single market in Europe without speaking of Brexit. And we even heard before that the UK wants to get closer to the EU than Norway or Switzerland. So we're speaking of a multi-speed market here, or multi-speed Europe. How can we build an innovation market now, now that the UK is about to leave? Would you like each to comment? I think you all have something to say.
Do I feel that one coming my way?
I think, yeah. But do comment, all of you, 1 minute each, and then we'll wrap up, all right?
I mean, I think it's really interesting that, as Mike Arthur had said, that today, as we're sitting here, that we have a paper published. There may not be a lot of detail in it, and I don't think if we sit here coldly and think about it, we would ever expect a lot of detail into it. But I think it really is significant in that it continues to commit the UK to wanting that very close relationship. And I don't know what size the cheque will be, and I don't know the other lines that will appear in the final thing that gets inked at the end of all this. But I sincerely hope, certainly from our perspective as a primary part of the UK's innovation ecosystem, and with strong connections to the universities and our own connections to Europe through them and through ourselves, I don't think it serves Europe or the UK to assume that what we are doing is getting on a boat and going west. The island's not moving, our proximity remains, and our desire, I believe, is still substantially, and I'm in Mike's camp when it comes to putting my cross on the piece of paper in terms of, I didn't vote to be where we are, but we are. I think we've got to go through that process. We've got to accept the short-term disturbance. Yes, it'll cost us a few people who, for very understandable reasons, decide to move. But I think the other side of that process will see a very strong bond and continue to see the UK participate strongly in European innovation.
Very good. Eva.
Yeah, just a few comments from my side. It's definitely true that in the UK, the EU is losing a leader in basic and applied research. There's no doubt about that. And it will have an impact on the UK life science sector. As was also mentioned in a number of the press releases I saw today, the UK has been a net beneficiary of EU research funds as well. And so, I mean, I think it's certainly, continued cooperation between the EU and the UK in research, in medicines regulation, even broader is definitely in the best interest of patients in Europe, broadly speaking, and certainly in the UK as well. The clock is ticking, and for businesses, it's really, really becoming difficult to sit there and wait. What do we do? Do we start actually doing something about our manufacturing and supply issues, or do we just hope for the best? And these are costly decisions, and right now we are in the phase one. We heard that, we keep hearing that from the Commission. We respect that, of course, but what do we do? Do we just sit with cool heads and wait? And maybe it's going to be too late if things don't go well, or do things go well and everything will be fine, and we'll have a transitional agreement and maybe a final agreement which will sort of get into the proximity between the UK and the EU that we all, well, at least I want, and probably our sector wants, and everybody seems to want here in this room.
Yeah, and Andreas, actually, just like Pfizer, Microsoft has a major R&D facility in the UK. Yeah. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So Brexit is probably quite frequent topic these days in a way, and as an economic player we will accept whatever decision is coming to be negotiated on this one. And actually before the Brexit referendum happened, we announced building data centers, and we have already data centers in operation, so we are basically represented on both sides of the channel, however the final solution is going to be. The research facility, our largest one in Europe, is currently Cambridge, in a way, which is our biggest hub in a way, but we consider our research to be European, and we consciously avoid using the term EU or UK, it's European in a way, and we are balancing out many of those kinds of activities. We just announced in a couple of weeks ago in Amsterdam, with University of Amsterdam, I think Max Schilling is his name, a program which we fund to keep academics in AI in Europe, because this is one of the kind of developments we see that is impacting innovation policy, that industry is siphoning up on researchers from universities back into companies, and we try to counter this kind of project, this momentum. Mm-hmm. The other thing, like quantum computing, is spread across Europe. We have facilities, partnership with universities on both sides of the channel on this one. And the last thing is that our innovation support program we do as a company, it's called Microsoft Accelerator, which is contributing funding to companies in the innovation phase, and Microsoft Ventures is represented on both sides of the channel. Okay. So we try to balance both parts.
Luc, do you want to have a 30-second concluding remark?
Well, for me, paradoxically, Brexit is having a positive impact on our research innovation community. And this is simply because it brings to the forefront how important research and innovation is for economic growth. So you see this on the UK side. The government has invested more in research. You could say maybe to buy off the Remain people, who were all concentrated in the scientific areas in university. But in any case, it invested. It made a commitment. Whether it will be able to keep those, we will see. And on the European side, if you hear Commissioner Moedas and you hear the debates in the European Parliament, it seems exactly the same thing. Mm. That is that suddenly in Europe, one finds it's unacceptable that 72% goes to agriculture and structural funds and 8% to research. So if this could be combined, then Brexit makes transparent how important research and innovation is for Europe. We then will have to organize all kind of ways by which we do as if it's not Brexit and we do associated plus or whatever, but these are the technical details which I leave over to people who know more about it. Thank you.
That was a bit provocative anyway to give you such a short time to speak about Brexit, but I'm sure we'll speak again about Brexit pretty soon. So I think it's time to wrap up. There are drinks outside, and before you all go and enjoy them, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Thank you also to the online audience. I saw the numbers, and the last time I saw them, quite a few people were watching online, so thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank our partners today, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, which will do more in the field of innovation markets in the coming months. And thank you to the speakers, and I think I've thanked everyone, so now it's time for drinks. Thank you.
So. Thank you very much. No. Well, maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought I should at least clarify it.